After I walked home from school, a random man inside said, "Why don't you get comfortable? Who are you?" I backed toward the door I'd just come through. A friend. He stood up slowly and walked over to take my coat and backpack. He was tall with graying hair and wore a business suit that looked expensive. He hung my things in the closet, knowing exactly which hook I always used. Everything about him seemed wrong. We never had visitors on Tuesday afternoons, and Mom always told me if someone was coming over. She'd text me during lunch or leave a note on the kitchen counter. But today, there'd been nothing. "Where are my parents?" My voice came out smaller than I wanted. The man adjusted his tie before answering. He got really serious and stooped down to my level. "They'll be here soon, so you have no reason to panic. Just stay calm. I'll cook you some eggs." I didn't want eggs. I wanted my mom. But something about the way he said it made me follow him to the kitchen. Maybe it was the way he turned his back to me so confidently. Like he knew I wouldn't run. He moved around like he knew where everything was. Found the pan in the right cabinet. Even grabbed the spatula from the correct drawer. I sat at the table because I didn't know what else to do. My usual chair felt different. Lower somehow. Or maybe I was just sinking into myself. That's when I noticed the red light. It was tiny and tucked into the corner where the wall met the ceiling. At first I thought it was a smoke detector, but it was too small. Then I realized it was a camera. The lens reflected the kitchen light like a tiny eye watching me. My eyes started scanning the room and I found more. One disguised as a clock above the microwave. Another that looked like a phone charger plugged into the outlet by the toaster. A third hidden in the fake plant on the windowsill. They were everywhere. How long had they been there? Who was watching? Something was very wrong and every instinct screamed at me to run. But he was between me and the door. His body blocked the path to the hallway while he whisked the eggs. The kitchen window was painted shut. Mom had been meaning to fix it for months. "I think I want to play outside now." I pushed my chair back slowly. The chair legs scraped against the floor, making a sound that seemed to echo forever. The man turned from the stove where eggs were starting to sizzle. The smell of butter filled the air, but underneath was something else. Something chemical. "Trust me. We'll be playing outside very soon. Just hang tight." The way he said playing made my skin crawl. Each syllable stretched out wrong. I glanced at the back door, but he noticed and moved to block that exit too. Just a small shift of his weight, but suddenly the door seemed miles away. He was still smiling, but his body language had changed. His shoulders squared. His stance widened. He was making sure I couldn't leave. The eggs kept cooking. Getting darker. Starting to smoke. Then there was a knock on the door. 3 quick raps that I recognized as my mom's pattern. The same rhythm she'd used since I was little. Relief flooded through me and I jumped up to answer it. My chair fell backward with a crash. But the man moved faster than I expected. Faster than any adult should move to block a child trying to reach its mother. His hand covered my mouth before I could scream, and he pulled me back against him. His palms smelled like latex gloves. "Don't say a word about me being here." His voice was different now. Harder. Scarier. Not the fake kindness from before. I nodded quickly and he let me go. My legs shook as I walked to the door. Each step felt like walking through water. I wanted to run, wanted to scream, but his eyes followed my every move. I turned the lock and opened the door to see my parents standing there looking normal, looking safe, looking tired from work. Mom hugged me first. "Hey, sweetie, how was school?" I hugged her back harder than usual, trying to communicate something was wrong without words. Dad ruffled my hair, and they both came inside chatting about their day traffic on the highway. A problem with the printer at Mom's office. Somehow, they didn't notice anything strange. We walked toward the kitchen, and I tried to figure out how to warn them. Maybe I could write something. Maybe I could use some kind of code. But before I could do anything, the world exploded. The windows shattered inward in a shower of glass. The front door flew off its hinges. Men in black tactical gear poured through every entrance with guns raised. The noise was deafening. Commands being shouted, boots thundering across our floor. "This is the FBI! Put your hands up!" My knees hit the floor hard and my hands went up without thinking. Glass crunched under me and cut through my jeans. The man who'd been cooking eggs lowered himself down real slow with his hands raised. He looked calm, like he expected this. Mom screamed and Dad kept asking what was happening. The agents were everywhere with their guns pointed at us. One of them stepped forward and I could see the name Raider on his vest. He started pointing and giving orders to the other agents. 2 of them pulled Mom and Dad to the wall by the sink. Another agent pushed me toward the refrigerator away from everyone else. The man stayed by the back door with 2 agents watching him. They patted him down and he just stood there smiling a little bit. Mom kept crying and asking what they did wrong. Dad's face was red and confused. Victor Raider walked over to my parents and started reading them something about rights. The agents were putting on gloves and pulling out plastic bags. One of them climbed on a chair and started unscrewing the tiny camera from the corner. He dropped it in a bag and wrote something on it. Another agent unplugged the fake phone charger and bagged it too. They got the clock above the microwave and the one in the plant. Each time they found another camera, my stomach felt worse. How many times had these strangers watched me eat breakfast or do homework at this table? Victor Raider came over and knelt down next to me. His vest smelled like leather and gunpowder. He asked if I was hurt and I shook my head. He asked if the man touched me and I shook my head again even though it wasn't true. The man's threat was still ringing in my ears. Victor asked if I knew who the man was and I just stared at the floor. The man cleared his throat and all the agents turned to look at him. He said his name was Jefferson Steele and he was a family friend. He said he was just waiting for my parents to come home from work. He looked right at me and said I could confirm that we knew each other. Everyone stared at me waiting for an answer. My throat felt like it was closing up. Jefferson's eyes had that same warning look from before I couldn't make any words come out. Victor watched me for a long moment, then stood up and walked away. About an hour later, a woman showed up with a badge and clipboard. She said her name was Elena Crawford from Child Protective Services. She talked to Victor in the corner and kept looking over at me. Then she came over and explained she needed to take me somewhere safe. Mom started crying harder and begging them not to take me. She said we hadn't done anything wrong. The agent said it was protocol when minors were involved in federal investigations. Dad tried to argue, but they wouldn't listen. Elena helped me stand up and brushed the glass off my clothes. She found my shoes by the door and helped me put them on. Outside, there were so many vehicles I couldn't count them all. They put Mom in one FBI car and Dad in another. Jefferson went into a black SUV with tinted windows. Elena led me to a regular sedan that smelled like air freshener. I pressed my face against the window as we drove away. Our house got smaller and smaller. Yellow tape was already going up around the yard. Elena kept trying to talk to me, but I couldn't stop shaking. She said everything would be okay, but nothing felt okay. We drove to a big building downtown with metal detectors at the entrance. Elena showed her badge and they let us through. We went up an elevator to the 3rd floor. Victor was already there in a room with soft chairs and toys in the corner. A camera with a red light was mounted on the wall. He asked me to tell him about coming home from the school. I told him about finding the man in our house. I said he knew where everything was and made eggs. I didn't tell him about being grabbed or threatened. Something inside me was still too scared Jefferson would know. Victor wrote things down and asked more questions. He wanted to know if I'd seen the man before or if my parents ever mentioned him. I said no to everything. After what felt like hours, Elena said we needed to go. She drove us across town to a neighborhood I didn't recognize. The house had a wooden fence and flowers in the front yard. Elena knocked and a woman answered with a big golden retriever jumping around her legs. The woman said her name was Natalie Bishop and she'd been expecting us. The house smelled like vanilla candles and something baking. Natalie showed me a bedroom with purple walls and a bookshelf full of young adult novels. She said this would be my room for now. The dog kept trying to lick my hands. Natalie made spaghetti for dinner, but I couldn't eat. My stomach hurt too much. I went to bed early but stayed awake all night. Every time I closed my eyes, I thought about those cameras. How long had people been watching me get dressed for school? How many strangers saw me singing in the shower or talking to myself? The next morning, Victor came back with a folder full of papers. He showed me a list of everything they found at our house. 12 cameras total, plus recording equipment in the basement. There were hard drives with months of footage. He said they'd been investigating a surveillance operation for a while. He wouldn't tell me if my parents were victims or suspects. The not knowing made me want to throw up. I pushed the folder away and looked straight at Victor. What about my parents? The words came out before I could stop them. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes before telling me they were still being questioned downtown but hadn't been charged with anything yet. He said they seemed shocked about the cameras, but there were problems with their stories that didn't match up. Part of me wanted to yell that they were innocent, but another part remembered how the man knew our house so well, and I didn't know what was real anymore. Elena came in carrying a plastic bag with my school stuff and sat down next to me. She explained that I'd be staying with Natalie for a few days while they figured out if our house was safe, and she handed me a card with her phone number written in blue pen. She promised to check on me every day and said I could call anytime, even at 3 in the morning if I needed to talk. The whole system felt huge and confusing, but at least someone was finally telling me what would happen next. Natalie's TV was on when we got back, and the local news was showing our house from a helicopter view with FBI agents carrying boxes out the front door. The reporter kept saying words like surveillance operation and federal investigation, while the camera zoomed in on the yellow tape around our yard. My phone started buzzing with texts from kids at the school asking if my parents were spies or criminals, or if we were in witness protection now. I turned it off and pulled my knees up to my chest on Natalie's couch, wishing I could just vanish into the cushions. Elena helped me check my social media on her laptop, and my accounts were going crazy with friend requests from random people and messages from strangers who'd seen the news. Some called my parents heroes fighting government spying, while others said they were sick criminals who sold videos of their own kid, and none of these people knew anything about our real life. Elena showed me how to make everything private and suggested I stay offline for a while, which seemed smart since reading those messages made me feel worse. 3 days later, the phone rang and Elena said it was Mom calling through the official system. Her voice sounded small and shaky as she told me to be good for Natalie and do my homework, but then she said something weird about looking for her recipe card when I got my backpack back. She kept mentioning chocolate chip cookies, which was strange because we never baked together, and then the call cut off at exactly 15 minutes before I could ask what she meant. That night, I couldn't sleep again, but this time the fear was mixing with anger that burned in my chest. I was tired of being scared and confused and pushed around by adults who wouldn't tell me the truth. I decided to stop just letting things happen to me and start paying attention to everything around me to figure out what was really going on. Victor came by the next morning with a typed version of my interview from that first day, and reading it felt wrong because they'd changed my words into official language. Where I'd said the man was super creepy, they wrote he exhibited concerning behavior, and my description of being scared became expressed fear response to subject's presence, which made me realize how my real feelings got twisted through their system. He said we needed to go back to the house so I could pack clothes and get my school things. Elena drove us there with 2 other agents following in another car, and when we pulled up, the yellow tape was still everywhere. Walking through the front door felt like entering someone else's house even though everything looked the same except for the holes in the walls where they'd pulled out the cameras. My room still had my posters and stuffed animals, But knowing strangers had watched me in there for months made my skin feel like bugs were crawling on it. I grabbed clothes without really looking at them and shoved them in a duffel bag while the agent stood in the doorway watching. In the kitchen, I found my backpack right where the man had hung it up, and I dumped everything out on the table to sort through it. My math folder fell open, and Mom's recipe card for chocolate chip cookies slipped out, which was weird because I'd never seen it before. The front had a normal recipe, but the back was covered in numbers that didn't look like measurements or ingredients. I slipped it in my pocket without showing anyone, remembering how Mom had stressed it on the phone call. Back at the FBI office, Victor mentioned they'd found emails on Mom's work computer that connected her county office to a contractor who installed security systems in government buildings. The dates matched up with when we started having those cameras, and he showed me printouts with highlighted sections about additional installations and residential testing that made my chest feel tight. Mom might have known something was happening in our house, and the betrayal mixed with confusion made it hard to breathe. Victor leaned forward in his chair and asked if I'd noticed the cameras before the raid happened. His pen was ready to write down whatever I said, but something made me hold back. I kept my answer simple, and didn't mention seeing them that afternoon when Jefferson was there. He watched my face for a few seconds like he knew I wasn't telling him everything, but then moved on to his next question. The next morning, Elena drove me to the school to meet with Sophia Perez, who worked as the counselor there. Sophia's office had posters about feelings and a bowl of candy on her desk that she pushed toward me. She explained that kids were already talking about what happened at my house, and some of the rumors were getting pretty wild. One group thought my parents were running a spy ring, and another said they were selling videos of me online, which made me feel sick. Sophia showed me a card I could give teachers if I needed to leave class, and we practiced what I'd say if kids asked questions. She also gave me her cell number and said I could text her anytime during school hours if things got too hard. That night, I was doing homework at Natalie's kitchen table when the house phone rang. Natalie answered it, but nobody said anything, so she hung up. 5 minutes later, it rang again, and this time there was a message on the machine. A man's voice came through the speaker making jokes about eggs being overcooked and how we'd have to play outside another time. My whole body went cold because I knew that voice. It was Jefferson, and he was letting me know he could find me. The room started spinning and I couldn't get enough air into my lungs. Natalie grabbed a paper bag from under the sink and held it over my mouth, telling me to breathe slowly. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't hold the bag myself. She rubbed my back and kept saying everything would be okay, but we both knew it wasn't true. After I calmed down enough to talk, I told her who the voice belonged to, and she called Elena right away. Elena came over within 20 minutes and listened to the message with a serious look on her face. She called Victor on her phone and put it on speaker so we could all hear. Victor said they'd trace the call and put extra agents watching the house starting tonight. He also said this was good because Jefferson had just given them evidence of witness intimidation, which was another charge they could use. For the first time since this started, I felt like I was helping catch him instead of just being scared. Elena stayed with us that night, sleeping on the couch and checking the locks every hour. The next day, Elena showed me something on her laptop that made my stomach drop. A news website had posted photos from a tech conference 6 months ago. There was Jefferson in his gray hair and expensive suit standing with 3 other men in front of a banner. The other men worked for the company Mom's office had hired for security work. The article called Jefferson a security consultant, which made me want to throw up knowing what his version of security meant. He was smiling in the photo with his arm around one of the other men like they were old friends. 3 days later, Elena picked me up early from Natalie's to go to the courthouse. She explained my parents would appear on a TV screen from jail for something called an arraignment. We sat in a small room with wood panels on the walls and a big screen at the front. The judge came in wearing black robes and sat at a high desk. Then the screen turned on and I saw my parents in orange jumpsuits standing in a gray room. Mom looked tiny and her hair was flat against her head. Dad kept rubbing his face with his hands over and over. The judge read a long list of charges, including conspiracy and failing to protect a minor. When he got to the bail amounts, the numbers were so big they didn't seem real. Mom started crying when she heard them, and Dad just stared at the floor. The whole thing lasted maybe 15 minutes before the screen went black. Elena walked me to her car and explained what would happen next. My parents couldn't call or write to me directly anymore, except through special supervised calls. There would be hearings to figure out who would take care of me permanently. The legal words were confusing, but I understood the main part. My family was broken and might never be fixed again. Part of me felt relief that I wouldn't have to go back to that house with all its cameras, but another part felt like someone had ripped something important out of my chest. 2 days after that, Victor asked me to come to his office to hear something. He had a recording device on his desk and pressed play. Dad's voice came through talking fast and desperate. He kept saying he thought they were just testing home security stuff for extra money. He swore he never knew about cameras in bedrooms or bathrooms. His voice cracked when he said he'd never put me in danger on purpose. Victor watched my face while the recording played. I wanted to believe Dad was telling the truth, but trust felt impossible after everything. The next supervised call with Mom was scheduled for that Friday. Her public defender had told her not to talk about the cameras or the contract or anything about the case. This made me mad because I needed answers, not more secrets. The 15 minutes went by with her asking about homework and if I was eating enough. She talked about the weather, where she was like we were strangers making small talk. When the call ended, I felt worse than before. The next morning, I asked Victor straight out why Jefferson wasn't in jail yet. He explained they needed solid proof he put the cameras in illegally instead of being hired by my parents to do it. The system had all these careful rules about evidence and burden of proof that protected bad people. Victor promised they were building a strong case, But his promises felt empty. Adults had been promising me things my whole life, and look where that got me. 3 days later, Natalie called me downstairs holding an envelope with my name written on it in block letters. The paper felt thick and expensive when she handed it to me. Inside was a single sheet with typed words about how eggs can get overcooked if you're not careful, and some recipes need to stay family secrets. My hands started shaking because I knew exactly who sent this. Elena grabbed the letter with a tissue and dropped it into a plastic bag while calling Victor. She kept asking if I was okay, but instead of feeling scared, I felt something else building in my chest. This man thought he could still control me from wherever he was hiding. That night, Elena packed my stuff and drove us to a hotel downtown, while the FBI figured out how Jefferson found Natalie's address. We got a room on the 3rd floor with 2 beds and a view of the parking lot. Elena ordered pizza and put on some comedy movie, but I kept getting up to check the door locks. I counted 5 times before she noticed and made me sit back down. After she fell asleep, I searched behind the TV and under the lamps for cameras, even though I knew I was being paranoid. The next morning, Victor came to the hotel with a thick folder of papers. He spread them across the little desk, showing me public records from Mom's office. Her department had approved something called a no-bid contract extension to Jefferson's security company worth $400,000. The dates matched exactly when she started working late all the time and coming home stressed. My chest got tight seeing the proof in black and white. Mom had signed papers that gave him access to everything. Victor pointed to the contract numbers at the bottom of each page and asked if they looked familiar. I stared at them for a long time before grabbing my backpack and pulling out Mom's recipe card. The numbers she'd written on the back weren't measurements at all. They matched the purchase order codes perfectly. She'd been trying to tell me about the contract without actually saying it. Victor's whole expression changed when I showed him the connection. Elena brought my old tablet from home the next day, and I spent hours trying different combinations of those purchase order numbers as passwords. Nothing worked at first. I tried them forward and backward and mixed up. My fingers got sore from typing, but I kept going because doing something felt better than just waiting. On my 20th try using the numbers plus Mom's birthday, the screen finally unlocked. That's when everything I'd been holding back crashed into me all at once. Jefferson knew which hook I used for my coat and which chair was mine because he'd been watching us for months through those cameras. He knew our routines and habits and private moments. The violation made me want to throw up. I found Victor's number and called him right then. The words came out fast as I told him everything about that day. How Jefferson grabbed me when I tried to answer the door. How his hand covered my mouth. How he threatened me to stay quiet. Victor's voice got hard and he said he'd be there in 20 minutes. The second FBI interview happened in a bigger room with better recording equipment. A female agent sat across from me taking notes while I described every detail. How Jefferson's palms smelled like latex gloves. How he moved faster than any adult should to stop a kid. How he held me against him and whispered threats. The agent's pen moved fast across her notepad, and her jaw got tight when I described him restraining me. She promised my testimony would make a real difference in the case. Speaking it all out loud made me feel lighter somehow. And 2 days later, Victor showed me parts of a surveillance warrant with certain sections highlighted. The legal language was confusing, but I understood the important part. Someone besides my parents had authorized the camera installation using forged signatures. They were looking at Jefferson as the main suspect now, instead of my parents being the masterminds. Hope started building in my chest for the first time since the raid. The photo array happened that afternoon in the FBI office. 6 pictures laid out on the table of different men with gray hair and business suits. I pointed to Jefferson immediately, without any hesitation. Victor asked if I was absolutely certain, and I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. My fingers stayed steady on his photo while they documented my identification. The identification gave them probable cause for more warrants. Victor explained they'd be searching Jefferson's office and home tomorrow morning. He thanked me for being brave enough to tell the truth and said my testimony was the key to everything. For the first time since this nightmare started, I felt like I was actually helping instead of just being dragged along by what adults decided. The next morning, Elena knocked on Natalie's door early with coffee and a thick folder under her arm. She sat down at the kitchen table and spread out photos from the search at Jefferson's office while Natalie made breakfast. The pictures showed stacks of surveillance equipment in boxes and filing cabinets full of folders with family names written on tabs. Elena pointed to 3 folders besides ours and said other families had the same cameras installed without knowing what they really were. My stomach twisted seeing those other names because it meant more kids had strangers watching them change clothes and sleep and live their private lives. Elena said the FBI was contacting those families now, and one mom had already broken down crying when agents showed her what they found. The equipment matched our home's layout exactly with diagrams showing which rooms got which cameras and notes about viewing angles. Jefferson had been running this operation for at least 2 years, according to the dates on the contracts. I pushed the photos away and went to get ready for school, even though facing everyone there felt impossible. Natalie drove me in her old Honda and walked me to the office where Sophia was waiting with her warm smile and hot chocolate. The hallways were full of kids staring and whispering, but I kept my head down and made it to first period math. Everything felt normal for about 10 minutes until my friend Sarah leaned over during the worksheet and asked if my parents sold me out for money. The words hit me like a punch, and before I knew it, I was standing up screaming at her that she didn't know anything about what happened. My voice got louder and louder as I told her about the cameras and the man in my house and how scared I was every single day. The teacher tried to calm me down, but I couldn't stop yelling about how nobody understood what it was like. Sophia appeared in the doorway and gently led me to her office while I sobbed so hard I couldn't breathe. She sat with me on the floor and helped me count my breaths until the shaking stopped. I told her I didn't know who I was anymore because, Was I a victim or a witness or the daughter of criminals or just some kid caught in adult mistakes? Sophia said I was all of those things and none of them at the same time because I got to decide who I wanted to be. We sat there for an hour while she let me cry and rage and finally just feel empty. Victor called that afternoon and asked if he could stop by Natalie's house with some new information. He showed up with a laptop and pulled up text messages between my parents from 3 weeks before the raid. Mom had written to Dad about being scared of the extra installations Jefferson wanted to add without her approval. She tried to back out of the whole thing, but Jefferson sent her screenshots of the contract saying it was binding, and if she tried to break it, he'd make sure she lost her job. Dad had texted back that they should go to the police, but Mom said Jefferson had connections everywhere and nobody would believe them over him. The messages kept going with Mom getting more desperate and Dad trying to find solutions, but nothing working. Victor said this context didn't erase what they did, but it helped explain how things got so bad. The supervised call with Mom was scheduled for that evening, and Elena helped me prepare by suggesting I write down my questions first. I made a list starting with why she let this happen, and ending with whether she ever really loved me, or just saw me as something to trade for money. When the call connected, Mom's face was puffy from crying and she looked older than I remembered. I asked her straight out why she let Jefferson put cameras in our house and watch me. She broke down sobbing and said she was so sorry, and that she made terrible choices trying to protect her job and keep our family stable. She said Jefferson started small with just security assessments, but kept pushing for more access, and by the time she realized what was happening, it was too late to get out. She swore she never knew about the cameras in private spaces, and thought it was just doorways and common areas for safety. Her voice cracked when she said she failed as a mother, and understood if I never forgave her. It was the first honest conversation we'd had since this started, and I felt something crack inside my anger. Elena suggested I keep writing questions before each call to help me stay focused, and get the answers I needed to move forward. The structure made me feel more in control of conversations that had been nothing but chaos and confusion. 2 days later, Natalie came home from work with her face white and her hands shaking. Someone had left a flyer on her car about home security services with handwritten notes about keeping children safe from predators. The forensics team came and lifted fingerprints from the paper, while Victor promised they'd increase patrols around the house. Jefferson had posted bail that morning, and this was his way of letting us know he was out. Instead of making me scared, it made me angry because he was still trying to intimidate us even with all the evidence against him. Charles McNamara, the prosecutor, came to meet with me and Elena the next day at the FBI office. He explained that my parents were cooperating fully with the investigation and would likely get plea deals with probation instead of jail time if they testified against Jefferson. He showed me charts about how the justice system worked and said it could be slow, but it was thorough. Understanding the process helped calm my anxiety about not knowing what would happen next. Victor brought in a victim advocate named Anne, who would help prep me for grand jury testimony. We spent hours in a conference room practicing how to tell my story clearly and stick to just the facts. Anne taught me to take deep breaths between answers and ask for breaks if I needed them. We went over the timeline again and again until I could say it without crying or getting confused. The preparation made me feel ready instead of vulnerable for what was coming. That night I couldn't sleep and kept thinking about the tablet Elena had brought from our house. I tried more password combinations using dates and numbers from Mom's recipe card, but nothing worked. Then I remembered the first camera installation date from the evidence photos and typed those numbers in. The screen unlocked and showed a home screen with only a few apps, including a video folder. My hands shook as I opened it and found dozens of files with dates as names. I clicked on the oldest one and saw Jefferson in our living room installing something behind a picture frame while checking a distinctive silver watch with a blue face. The video was clear enough to see his face and the watch details perfectly. I saved the file to the cloud and called Victor immediately, even though it was past midnight. He answered on the second ring and told me to send him everything right away. The FBI tech team worked through the night matching the watch in the video to photos of Jefferson at public events and conferences. They found 12 photos over 6 months where he wore that exact watch with its unique blue face and silver band. Combined with my testimony about him being in our house and the office evidence, Victor said they had enough for serious federal charges that would put him away for years. 3 weeks later, the grand jury subpoena showed up at Natalie's house in a thick envelope that made my hands shake when I opened it. Elena came over that afternoon to help me understand all the legal language and what would happen next. Victor met us at the FBI office the next day for more preparation, and we went through my testimony one more time in the conference room. He showed me a diagram of the grand jury room, so I'd know where everyone would be sitting and where to look when I talked. Elena promised she'd be waiting right outside the door even though she couldn't come in with me. The morning of my testimony, I threw up twice before breakfast, and Natalie held my hair back without saying anything about how gross it was. We drove to the courthouse in Victor's car because he wanted to make sure we got there safely. Walking through the metal detectors, I saw Jefferson standing by the elevators with his lawyer and 2 other men in suits. He looked right at me with that same cold stare from my kitchen, but this time I didn't look away. Victor and Elena stood on either side of me, and I stared back at him until his lawyer pulled him toward a different hallway. The grand jury room was bigger than I expected, with 23 people sitting in rows like a small theater. The prosecutor asked me to raise my right hand and swear to tell the truth, which I did, even though my voice cracked. I sat in the witness chair and looked at all those faces watching me. The prosecutor started with easy questions about my name and age and where I went to the school. Then he asked me to describe what happened when I came home that Tuesday afternoon. I told them everything just like we practiced, keeping my sentences short and clear. I described finding Jefferson in my house and how he knew where everything was. I told them about seeing the cameras and feeling trapped in my kitchen. When I got to the part where he grabbed me and covered my mouth, several jury members leaned forward in their seats. I kept my voice steady even though my hands were shaking under the table where they couldn't see. The prosecutor asked if the man who grabbed me was in the courthouse today, and I said yes. He asked if I'd seen him, and I said yes in the hallway by the elevators. One jury member asked why I didn't scream for help when my parents came home. I explained how Jefferson threatened me, and how scared I was that he'd hurt us if I said anything. Another asked if I was sure about the dates and times, and I said yes because I'd written everything down with Victor's help. The prosecutor showed them the video I'd found on the tablet with Jefferson installing cameras. They played it on a big screen and everyone could see his face clearly. While I was answering questions, Victor told me later that FBI agents were searching 3 other houses and 2 offices at the exact same time. They found the same kind of cameras in all of them, and purchase orders with Mom's office codes. They arrested 2 other executives from Jefferson's company who were running the whole operation. The grand jury voted to indict all 3 of them while I was still in the building. Victor met me outside the room and told me they'd been charged with conspiracy, surveillance of minors, and witness intimidation. My parents got separate charges for child endangerment, but the prosecutor said they'd get plea deals for cooperating. Jefferson's bail got revoked because of the witness intimidation, and they took him straight to federal detention. Elena drove me back to Natalie's house, but we only made it 3 blocks before I started crying. So hard she had to pull over. Everything I'd been holding in for weeks came out all at once. She parked in a grocery store lot and held me while I sobbed and shook and couldn't catch my breath. She didn't try to make me feel better or tell me to calm down. She just kept saying it was okay to feel everything. 2 weeks later, Mom and Dad went to court for their plea hearings on different days. Mom went first and stood in front of the judge looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. She pled guilty to conflict of interest charges, and the judge gave her 2 years probation with 300 hours of community service. She lost her county job immediately and had to pay a fine that took most of her savings. Dad's hearing was the next day, and he pled to negligent child endangerment. The judge gave him 18 months probation and parenting classes he had to complete before he could have unsupervised visits with me. Our first family therapy session happened a month after the pleas in a small office that smelled like vanilla candles. The therapist made us sit in a triangle so we could all see each other. I told them exactly how violated I felt, knowing strangers watched me in my own room. I told them how betrayed I felt that they put money before my safety. Mom cried through the whole thing and Dad kept rubbing his eyes. They didn't make excuses or try to explain why they did it. They just listened and said they were sorry over and over. I told them I needed complete honesty from now on about everything. No more secrets, even small ones. They both agreed and signed a paper the therapist wrote up about transparency. Elena helped us find a new apartment since we had to sell the house to pay legal fees. It was small with just 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, but it had regular locks and no smart devices anywhere. Mom got a job at a grocery store stocking shelves at night. Dad found work at a warehouse loading trucks. They made less money than before, but at least it was honest work. Sophia met with me at the school to figure out how to finish the year without failing. She set up a modified schedule where I could leave class if things got too hard and make up work at home. Most kids had already moved on to other drama, but a few came up to me and said they thought it was cool that I stood up to Jefferson. The next week, Victor called to tell me Jefferson got arrested on federal charges, and the judge denied bail because he was a flight risk and had threatened witnesses. I slept through the whole night for the first time in months, knowing he was locked up in federal detention waiting for trial. The county held a big press conference about reforming their whole contract system after our case exposed how easy it was to pressure employees into illegal stuff. Mom had to go testify at a special hearing about how the pressure worked and what Jefferson did to make her sign those papers. She sat at a long table with 5 county commissioners asking her questions for 3 hours, while reporters took notes in the back rows. I watched from the hallway through the door window and saw her crying when she explained how Jefferson threatened her job if she didn't approve his cameras. The commissioners voted to change all their rules about contracts and started investigating the whole procurement office to find other problems. Mom said helping them understand what happened made her feel like maybe something good could come from our mess. 3 weeks later, we had to go back to our old house one last time to get furniture and photos. Before the bank took it to pay all the legal fees, Dad rented a truck, and we spent the whole day loading boxes and deciding what to keep. I packed my stuffed animals from when I was little, but left the desk where I used to do homework knowing strangers had watched me there. Mom grabbed photo albums and her grandmother's china, but left most of the living room furniture that felt contaminated somehow. Dad took his tools from the garage and some books but didn't want much else. We worked mostly in silence except when we had to coordinate moving heavy stuff. I found the recipe box where Mom had hidden that coded card and almost threw it away, but decided to keep it as a reminder of how she tried to warn me. The house looked empty and sad when we finished, and I didn't look back when we drove away. At the school the next month, my parents had to come for a meeting about my progress, and they sat on opposite sides of the conference table, which felt weird, but better than fake togetherness. Sophia explained my grades had improved since I started the modified schedule, and both my parents nodded and took notes separately. Mom asked about my anxiety levels, and Dad wanted to know if I needed tutoring for the classes I'd missed. They didn't argue or blame each other and stayed focused on what I needed to succeed. The principal said it was nice to see parents working together even in difficult circumstances. After everyone left, Sophia told me she was proud of how I was handling everything. That weekend, I started writing everything down in a journal Elena had given me with a lock on it. I wrote about finding Jefferson in our house and the cameras and the FBI raid and everything that happened after. I tried to stick to facts and my real feelings without being mean about my parents, even though part of me was still mad. Writing it all down helped me see the whole story clearly, instead of just scary pieces jumbling around in my head. I filled up 40 pages the first day, and kept going every night before bed. Victor called 2 weeks later to tell me Jefferson pleaded not guilty to all charges, and his trial would start next year. He said I might have to testify again, but the protective order meant Jefferson couldn't come within 500 feet of me or my family. The prosecutor was confident they'd convict him with all the evidence we'd gathered plus testimony from the other families he'd targeted. I told Victor I was ready to testify as many times as needed to keep him locked up. The CPS case finally closed the next month after Elena filed her final report saying Mom had completed all requirements and Dad had finished his parenting classes. The judge gave Mom primary custody with supervision requirements like monthly check-ins and mandatory therapy. Dad got regular visitation every other weekend, and Wednesday dinners Victor showed up at the courthouse and gave me his business card with his personal cell number written on the back. He said to call if I ever needed anything, or felt unsafe, and that he was proud of how brave I'd been through everything. Elena hugged me and said she'd check in sometimes, just to see how I was doing. That afternoon, Mom and I went to our new apartment and decided to make cookies together for the first time since everything happened. She pulled out her real recipe this time with no codes or secrets, and we measured flour and sugar like normal people. The kitchen had regular clocks and no cameras and simple locks on the doors. We mixed chocolate chips into the dough, and I ate some raw even though Mom said I shouldn't. The cookies came out perfect, and we sat at our small table eating them warm while they were still soft in the middle. Outside the window, I could see kids playing in the courtyard, and everything felt quiet and safe and almost normal again. Feels kind of like watching someone put their life back together, piece by piece, after it all came crashing down. Wild to think about. I'll catch you in the next one. Subscribe for more content like this.